Hello and welcome to Conversation about History of the Center for Russian and East European Studies at the University of Michigan. My name is Olga Virakhovskaya. I'm Assistant Archivist at the Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan and proud recipient of CREES Master's degree in 1996. And here with us we have two former directors of the center, Professor Bill Rosenberg and Professor Bill Zimmerman. Welcome. Professor, okay. Sorry.
I bet you'll be more comfortable if you say Bill.
I will call you Bill.
Bill will call me William, as he has for almost 50 years.
So let's go to the early years of the center. And we'll start with you, Bill. Since you came first on campus, you arrived in 1963, a little more than 2 years after the Center for Russian Studies was established.
Yeah.
And you, Bill, you arrived in 1967, the same year the Center for Russian Studies became the Center for Russian and East European Studies to recognize the university's interest in Eastern Europe and research and training in Eastern Europe. What can you tell us about the early years and the state of the Russian and East European studies at that time?
Well, I obviously came almost at the beginning, and I came, the position that I had in political science was partly funded by the center, and in fact was funded by John Mercereau in the Slavic department, who administered one of the first of the grants from the federal government. And I remember that vividly because they paid a third of my salary, and every year would come September and I would get a deduction in my salary because somebody had forgotten to put the appointment through to pay me. So as little as I was getting, 2/3 of what I was getting was and only getting 2/3 was memorable. But the beginning of the center was really, I think, in many ways, what occurred when Morris Bornstein became the director. I think he provided a kind of impetus and sort of organizational skills that made a lot of difference. And then the political science hired Al Meyer, who became the director, and I was actually, Al was my immediate predecessor as the director. And truth to tell, I was the university was better off with me being an administrator and with Al being teaching more. And I say that with all, great fondness for the man, but he was a better teacher than I was. I'm a better pusher. I push paper better than Al.
I would say one thing, I also came with half my appointment paid for through the center. And the center attracted a number of faculty because it got its resources from the Department of Education as part of this expansion of Russian, East European, Soviet studies, Cold War politics, and the rest of it. But I think both Bill and I and Zvi and Al Meyer and others, Zvi Gilman, came from centers at Harvard or Columbia in particular, where we were engaged with scholars from other disciplines and around issues of mutual interest to us. There was a great deal of intellectual activity and scholarly activity around those sets of issues. So when we came to Michigan, when I came to Michigan a few years after Bill, the center was really a center of professional identity and intellectual activity and commitment. We had a number of very, very lively seminars, and we were engaged there. Faculty meetings were more lively than at the department. It was only over time that the departmental loyalties and departmental commitments superseded the center.
The one name that was not in Bill's list was Roman Sprog, who, among other things, really I mean, his appointment, as I remember, we never had an appointment. Roman never had an appointment in political science, but he straddled politics and history in a nice way. And Zvi, he, I, and Bill, and I think all, and Al too. But Al, I mean, part of this was a generational thing. When we were all essentially the same age, Al was a little, Meyer was a little older, and it was a very lively interchange among us and with our students and with the students who interact with each other. I would be, I or Zvi would often be the outside reader on a history dissertation, and vice versa. Bill or Roman would be the outside reader on a dissertation. So it was a very flourishing enterprise, and people came over. There was a real coffee pot function that people would come over and, what are you doing these days? Well, I've been thinking of doing a proposal on X. Oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe we should think about doing it together, things like that.
So you mentioned some departments at the university at large. So can you tell a little bit about the relationship between different individual departments and faculty?
Well, that skips the story ahead a bit in many ways, but I can tell you that there was a big difference in the receptivity to Russianists or East European specialists in history and political science than there was, for instance, in economics or in sociology. And I think it's the case that this is the only that Walt Connor's non-promotion to associate professor with tenure in sociology was the only tenure battle I had ever lost in which I was on the, no, there's one other, in which I was for promoting a guy and I lost. I've been on many times in the department. I've been on the losing side where I thought this guy was an idiot and voted against him. But I never, it was very difficult to convince sociology at that stage that Walt Connor fit in as a tenured person in the sociology department. And there was a kind of, basically in the sociology department, there was a divide between those who said that he was the best sociologist doing Soviet stuff since Alex Inkelis, and the other half who said, but we wouldn't hire Inkelis either. And I couldn't talk with those people. I had quite a bit of difficulty. I would begin to sputter. And the issue never arose very much in the case of economics because they had made the decision to hire Morris Bornstein. Morris was an active member, of course, Senate director, but then an active member of the Senate for a very long time. So those were the most probably, over the long haul, the most problematic departments for me, at least in terms of my tenure as Senate director.
Well, I would say, anthropology was not terribly supportive, and the contrast.
We didn't have anybody in anthropology. We did, yes, and I remember that very well.
Right. But one of the significant changes in terms of the relationship between the Senate and the disciplines is we have a great cohort of people in sociology and in anthropology who are working in the Eurasian, East European, Russian, Soviet field, post-Soviet fields. So the disciplines have become more malleable and permeable over time. And I think the cohort of people engaged in the field is much larger, even though the community of people engaged in the field is somewhat weaker.
One of the things that Bill Lockwood did, though, and which I carried forward with John Fine in the history department's wife, Jenna Fine, was that when I was Senate director, one of my own personal performance indicators was the number of lambs that we roasted in a lamb roast. And I and my tenure went from a one lamb roast to a three lamb roast. And it was an enormously fun event, classically Balkan. What's the matter? You don't like my food? Eat, you know, this sort of thing. And but it was also, it became I think for an awful lot of people, it was one of the things that they looked forward to in terms of college-wide events and university-wide events. Genna was John's wife. Genna was originally a Serbian peasant, and so she really knew firsthand how to roast the lamb. And she was always very cordial and willing to do so. It was a strange, unusual life cycle in which she went from being a Serbian peasant to being a student, graduated from Brandeis and married John Fine, came to Ann Arbor and John Fine took an appointment.
I should say that we did know each other. I mean, I knew Roman Sporlak at Stanford when I was doing dissertation research out there, and I knew John. We were graduate students together at Harvard, and I knew Genna, and I know Bill from Columbia, and Zvig from Columbia, and Al Meyer we all knew in any case. So this was.
Well, I knew Al in a very specific event first before he came here. It was an unusual situation. I've been here a couple of years, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for trying to hire a second senior person other than Bill Ballas. And I had met Al at a conference, and we were in this conference for a week together, and a lot of time spent in places where there were libations, and we got to know each other pretty well, including in something that I've always remembered, which was a chicken fight in the swimming pool with me carrying Al. This is before I got the job at Michigan. This was my last year as a graduate student. And chicken fighting, Wolfgang Leonard, who was on Tom Rayner's back. Tom Rayner was a graduate student who actually didn't finish his PhD. But Alex Dahlin ran this conference, and I and a guy named Gray Hodnett, who had a very successful career at the CIA as a researcher, and Tom Rayner were the three token graduate students who were brought along to this thing. And in the process, this is how I met Al. And then when we recruited Al from Michigan State, I actually, even though I was very, very junior at that stage, actually was asked by the chair to write an informal letter asking Al he would be interested in moving, and this book.
Careful, I know the story.
Do you know what he said?
Yeah, I do.
He said, you can decide about whether this is going to go in. He wrote me back and said, everybody is movable from Michigan State. and we hired him.
I would like to ask you about your directorships at the center. And you both were director in the 70s,
yes.
And again for a short period.
Well, that was really a fill-in. Sort of interregnum. They needed a warm body. Did it for a year.
And you both were director for much of the 80s, so there are, between two of you, there are 20 years of CREES history.
Oh,
what?
Not 20 years of directorship.
Directorship.
No, it just seemed that
felt that way. See why we get along.
So what were the major accomplishments and challenges during your directorships? We'll start with you.
Well, one of the things that I thought was a real challenge when I became director was to try to raise the research profile and visibility of the center. We did have a fairly good system, which I wish we have continued, of of binding and exchanging people's articles, and we actually read them. So we would have 20 or 30 articles over the course of a year or so, and we would circulate them in nice CREES bindings. And we became, I think, familiar with each other's work, and it gave us a basis on which we didn't read them all, obviously, but that's how I first, it wasn't, not necessarily Marxism book and Almayer's other works, but his articles that I read, and Bill's and others, and my own were circulated.
I think Berisha was responsible for this. I wanted to call the series CREES Prince and CREES Marx, and it got vetoed, and
I think we had CREES Marx as our newsletter. I think, right? Didn't we have CREES Marx as our newsletter? But in any case, we established when I was director. I think one achievement that I'm pleased with is that we managed to establish a publication series, which has I think languished for various reasons.
With Indiana.
With Indiana.
You have a lot of credit for that.
And we began to publish our books through that series, not only ours, our own, of course, but bringing books into the series and encouraging people who were affiliated with the university to publish their books in the series. So there's a really nice bunch of books that came out. But I think that also came from one of Bill's achievements, because we were able to do that through Mellon money, which provided a subvention for a number of years to help publish these volumes. Our model here was the China Center, which and Southeast Asia also, which did a great deal of publication. The Russian Center didn't. When Bill, I think, was primarily responsible for encouraging Mellon to give us a good chunk of money to support the center. Can't remember the details of it.
Neither could I.
We used some of that money to fund this series, and the series still exists, but it exists more as I think Indiana University Press advertising matrix than it does as a functioning series.
Since Bill has mentioned the China Center, I want to tell you an anecdote about when I had accepted becoming the center director, but before I became the center director, actually. We were in the Lane Hall next, well, I'm thinking Lane Hall, but with the Lane Hall, and there was some unused space, and in a kind of microcosm of the world that we were living in internationally, the China Center wanted to acquire this huge space. It was Peter Steiner.
Peter did it.
Absolutely Peter Steiner.
Your initiative, and Peter responding to Bill's initiative, to create a series of protected positions in foreign areas.
Peter was an economist and in many ways a very complicated person, but he was smart enough to realize that if there was a position available, and the likelihood that a department would opt to do somebody in the Russian East European field rather than more general theorists was small, and that frankly you needed a protectionist policy. And he was really the moving force in creating FASAC. I actually then, in my guise, as sort of the party second secretary, the dean for appointments, whereas the economists kept saying the dean for disappointments, because I got the wonderful task of calling up the chairs and saying, well, we're not going to, Jones isn't going to make it through this time. But I then was involved in figuring out how these positions should be allocated across departments and which fields should be protected. Zimmerman, who thought he knew a little bit about the Soviet Union, felt there would always be a Soviet position, so what we really needed to protect in political science was the East European position.
And this was very important with the departments that, for disciplinary reasons, were not particularly sympathetic to interdisciplinary work that the centers represent. The harder social sciences, in particular anthropology, history, not history, anthropology, economics, and so forth. But still we had difficulty. I remember having a rather heated exchange with Peter about whether or not the Slavics department should teach Czech. And we ultimately prevailed, but there were all sorts of questions about whether Czech was a useful language and why we should do it and all the rest of it.
My next question is about the courses.
Courses.
What reflections you have on courses taught, and I have prepared a little list of courses you taught. I think it's important to mention.
I have no recollection of those events, Counselor.
As long as they sound like courses I'd like to take.
Well, I've taken some of them. They were great. So, Bill Rosenberg, your research interests include Russia, Soviet Union, comparative revolutionary movements, and the archives. And you have taught courses on Imperial Russia, studies in modern Russian history, survey of Russia, the Soviet Union and its successor states, Russia under the Tsars, St. Petersburg, Leningrad, St. Petersburg, city as history. You also taught together with Francis Boyne, director of the Departmental Library, and a course on archives and social memory. Can you reflect on some of the courses you've taught?
Well, I would say, since we're reminiscing, I would say that one of the things that we paid attention to collectively in the olden days, as we were starting to say, was what the curriculum looked like. So I mentioned before that we had fairly lively faculty meetings. I think we met every month, and I think the executive committee met every week.
It seemed that way.
Or maybe every other week.
Yeah, I don't know.
But one of the issues, why would we have so much, not that we like meetings, but there are lots of issues that we needed to discuss. What should the curriculum look like? What should training look like? What would we need to do to have good training? So these courses, some of these courses are just ordinary, nothing particularly unique or special about them. Any good institution will offer these sorts of courses. I think that over the years, though, the course that CREES itself sponsored, first in the Russian area 395, and then later in the East European area, it came out of the synergies that we're talking about. We thought it was very important not only to introduce different perspectives to the students who were being trained in this area. These were always very successful courses. That was the first course I taught the very first semester I came. Was that one of the courses was the Imperial Russian course, and the other course was the CREES course. Incidentally, I taught all the sections of the CREES course, 7 of them. I didn't know better when I first came. In the fall of 1967, I had 7 sections of CREES, 4 discussion sections, and 3-hour meetings that I attended. So, but it was great, and I got to know the faculty and so on and so forth. Over the years, I think the courses have become richer as the disciplinary boundaries have become weaker. And I think that in my own courses, and I think in most of our courses, we have introduced perspectives and approaches, anthropological, cultural, social, even linguistic, that we didn't do early on. We would hope there'd be some progress in this area in the 50-odd years or 40-odd years that we've been doing.
There was one great thing about the original Soviet survey course, and that was the nature of the Soviet system. Because the Soviet system penetrated society in ways that almost all other authoritarian systems did not. And so when we did the Soviet survey course, and today today is Tuesday, and tomorrow, and 2 days from now will be Thursday, and we're doing Soviet literature, people could talk about the way in which things like socialist realism are connected to the evolution of the Soviet political system and the evolution of Soviet society, and then you talk about industrialization and the collectivization and what have you. And this again, the theme of the regime's penetration of the system and of people's efforts to work the system and to operate within these heavy constraints, but somehow or another people did work the system, and that gave a kind of intellectual integrity to the course that was sort of built in, and which made it a very made it, you know, people would always ask, well, how do you tie these things together? And I'd say, I guess tied together by the Soviet government, and it did.
I need to mention some of the courses you've taught.
Tell me what courses I've taught.
You have taught Government and Politics of Soviet and Post-Soviet Russia,
True.
Soviet and Russian Foreign Policy, Comparative Foreign Policy, St. Petersburg, and Russian Politics. What is it about St. Petersburg?
Oh, I was really fun. When we did the tercentenary of the founding of St. Petersburg, I conspired to teach an undergraduate seminar. I went to Swarthmore, so I know something about undergraduate seminars. I'd never taught an undergraduate seminar here in all the time I've been here. And I taught an undergraduate seminar on St. Petersburg politics. And it was a lot of fun. I went in and told the undergraduates, every once in a while I'll try to sneak some political science in, but basically we're going to spend the semester talking about killing, because the history of St. Petersburg go from 1905 to 1914 to the Civil War to a brief halcyon period during that, to collectivization, to the purges, to World War II, to the Leningrad affair, etc. There's a lot of killing, and it was really animated the students, and it was probably the single most fun course I've taught to undergraduates.
I also enjoyed teaching undergraduate seminars, and Al Meyer was he was not only a very, very gifted teacher, but he was great in pushing us in this direction, and he once said, I'm sure I wasn't the only one that he said this to, that we really needed to work on our undergraduate teaching. An undergraduate would come to him and wanted to learn Russian, and Al had asked him, why did you want to learn Russian? And he said, because I want to read Marx in the original. And and after that, he said, we really need to work on our undergraduate.
Right. But first of all, it's important to know, I learned this subsequently, that while we all laugh about this, there are a couple of documents by Marx that were never published in German and are published only in Russian. About two, the number's about two, but the person was, you could imagine it being the case that this person was very sophisticated. He or she,
imagine, but
yes,
not in this world.
He or she was not.
And St. Petersburg was Marisha's doing. I mean, she needs to get credit for that great celebration, and that was really a great year. And that's why I got involved in the St. Petersburg course and lectures and so on and so forth. But also why St. Petersburg, Bill and I have also been involved with the European University of St. Petersburg since its founding. So we have connections there, and Bill was instrumental in developing this really unique program in political science to have joint PhDs with the European University and Michigan. So there's been a great deal of intellectual synergy. Why St. Petersburg instead of Moscow? It's very simple. It's that the intellectual climate in St. Petersburg in our fields and in most fields is a much more open, much more lively, not all fields, but much more lively climate than it is in Moscow. Most of us do a great deal of work in Moscow, other places, but the intellectual vitality in our fields is largely centered. It's not exclusively ours.
Last year, both three gentlemen and I co-taught, team taught. I taught with Vladimir Gelman, who's about as good as they come, on Russian contemporary Russian politics, via video conferencing. Standard is called 644, Political Science 644, and we did it together every every Monday or Tuesday, I think it was Monday, at 9 a.m. Ann Arbor time, 5 p.m. Moscow Square, and I would say good afternoon, Professor Gelman. He would say good morning, Professor Zimmerman, and we would be on. And then Zvi and a fellow, and this is illustrative of the kinds of people we've taught here over the years, Zvi and Edward Panarin, who is a PhD in sociology from the department here, team taught and teaches at the European University. He and Zvi and Ed taught a seminar in nationalism and ethnicity that Zvi usually teaches. And to make a nice wrinkle in what they did, Zvi, when they came to substantive discussions of various ethnic issues or nationality issues, Zvi did the Russian ones, Russian and East European ones, and Ed did the American ones. And it worked very well. There were some real problems first time around with technical problems, but we solved it the American way. We threw money at it, and things are working well.
Well, one reason why this is a very good program is that in contrast to the olden days, the cohort of students here is so much smaller. When I taught graduate courses in either studies courses, seminars in the Russian and Soviet fields, it would be rarely the case that there weren't 8 or 10 students. Since we now only admit 1 or 2 students at the most, it's very, very difficult to get a cohort of students. I think the students have lost from this isolation from each other, and obviously the teaching is much less fun. So we have to find some other ways of getting a critical mass so that there's a lot of engagement and around issues that we're interested in. And I think this has been great, and I hope we can extend this sort of. I'm not in principle in favor of this kind of distance learning, but this is not distance learning. This is simultaneous learning from two groups of people who are at a distance from each other.
There are ways to reduce the sense of distance. Last year we brought Gelman here at the very beginning of the semester so that when the students saw him on the screen, he didn't look like one of those ads at Kroger's with a guy, to a cardboard picture of a guy with a six-pack or something or other. That they could associate him with a real person. And I've been discussing with one of the deans in Rackham in the graduate school the funding of sending Americans to Russia for a 4 or 5 day period to work out a joint paper, and that the assignment, the main assignment, would be a semester-long, 25-page article length paper co-authored by a Russian participant and an American participant. I think that'll help it a lot. Having solved some of the technical problems helped it a lot too, because it was enormously frustrating to have the screen go blank on you and things like that.
About teaching, last quick comment, because I guess we don't have too much more time. In more recent years, though, one of the nice things that happened in the area of teaching is we've gotten more students from natural resources, music, public policy fields that in the past we didn't have, and this has worked both ways. I've been on 2 musicology students' PhD dissertation committees, and that's been a great deal of fun for me, and I've learned a great deal from that. And 4 in natural resources, which is less fun because natural resources is less fun than music for me. On the other hand, it's still very interesting stuff.
I'm surprised that I haven't been on music. There are good reasons why.
We don't have much time left, and I just wanted to ask you about the future. Where do you think it's going? What should CREES be doing? Where is it developing? How is it connected to the region?
As my colleagues in Russian history will say, it's very difficult for Russian historians to predict the past, much less to predict the future. You want to know what the future is going to be like in ask your question again. In terms of the center, or in terms of the field, or
and how it's applied to the field? Can we connect?
Well, I think that I would say this without thinking a great deal about it. I think the challenges of developing the center may be much more daunting now than they were when Bill and I were directors, because the community is somewhat less sympathetic, and Russia's no longer this great problem yet. So there's that. I think it's probably more difficult for the center to develop the kind of intellectual synergy to be supportive in these ways than it was when we were children. So there are challenges there. But I think that these challenges, what the future of the center is going to look like, depends on how these challenges, those two challenges in particular, are met, and that will depend on people. Good directors can do amazing things if they have good vision and can make their arguments well. Lazy directors, and there have been a few of those, slide through and nothing much gets done. So I think it's contingent. Historians like contingency.
Mm-hmm.
It's not often I get a chance to end something with a quote from Stalin, but Stalin said, "Congress decide everything."
So on this note, on this great quote, I think we can end our conversation. Thank you very much.
Well,
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.